Hello everyone. In a moment you will hear a more detailed retelling of the movie Powder. We hope you enjoy it. The story begins when a pregnant woman is rushed to the hospital after being struck by lightning. Tragically, only her baby survives, and he is born as an albino. The father, filled with anticipation and worry, asks to see the newborn, who is placed gently in an incubator. However, the device that measures brainwaves reveals an unusually high level of activity. Overwhelmed, the man declares, "That's not my son," and he breaks down in tears. It's been quite some time. The unusual child was raised by his grandparents, but unfortunately, they passed away. It turns out that the relatives had been keeping albino hidden away in the basement. Sheriff Barnum decided to bring in a child psychologist named Jesse Caldwell. Neighbors claim the kid is mentally challenged and somewhat unstable. Perhaps the elderly couple had a reason for keeping him hidden. The sheriff, along with the psychologist, went down into the basement. The boy was sitting in the dark and calmly stated that his name was Pedro. At last, the man arrived. His name is Jeremy Reed. That's actually Powder's real name. The sheriff couldn't stop staring at this extraordinary man. Jeremy explained that he can be outside as long as the sun isn't too high in the sky. He suffers from a painful sensitivity to sunlight. Sometimes even wearing dark glasses doesn't provide relief. Powder never attended school, yet he has a passion for reading. His memory is phenomenal. The man asked Jesse to pick any page in a book, and from memory, he recited precisely what was written on that page. He knows by heart all the books that are in his rather considerable library. Pedro, wearing dark glasses and an old grandfather's suit, emerged from the basement. As he walked past the police cars, a siren suddenly blared. It was only then that the sheriff noticed that the roof of the house was covered with lightning rods, and the deputy mentioned that the deceased grandfather's body was saturated with electricity, almost as if he had been fibrillated. Jesse brought the Powder to the small town of Witten. She works at a boarding school for boys and intends to keep him here. An unusual young man quickly captured the attention of the boys who were playing soccer. Jesse mentions to her colleague that Jeremy behaves like a child who is unintelligent and doesn't yet understand the world. In the cafeteria, Jeremy eats apart from the others. Naturally, he can't escape the notice of the local bullies. They sat him down, asking why he looked like a vampire. Jeremy ignored their leader, John, who took his food and said newcomers must balance the spoon on their nose or put it up their asses. Powder rubbed the spoon and left it standing on the table. The rest of the cutlery magnetized to it, freezing everyone in the dining room. Then, another spoon appeared, and while dancing, it jumped to the others, completely destroying the whole structure. Powder smiled, but John gave him a rather unkind look. The sheriff has a very complicated relationship with his son, and his wife Emma is terminally ill, suffering from great pain. The entire town is already gossiping about the unusual guy. The caregiver is also sharing her opinion, saying, "We don't need another defective one." The doctor thoroughly examined Jeremy and said he was perfectly healthy. Soon, he would be given special lenses to protect his eyes from the bright lights. Jesse proposed that the young boy should attend the local school, and he agreed with her suggestion. By the time the first day of school arrived, Jeremy had received his lenses. As he stepped off the bus, he immediately attracted surprised looks from all the students gathered in the schoolyard. Physics was taught by an eccentric teacher named Donald Ripley. He introduced a device known as Jacob's ladder. It was originally invented as a means to demonstrate the properties of electric current. The electric arcs, appearing one after another, made Powder feel quite uncomfortable. He began shaking all over, while the metal objects surrounding him started bouncing and warping. Suddenly, electricity started to pass through Jeremy and then back again. The boy was lifted into the air, levitating until Donald finally shattered the device. When the teacher touched the boy, an electric current surged through his body. Reporters have gathered outside the hospital where Jeremy was taken, but the sheriff is not allowing them to enter. Donald also attempts to get into the room. The doctor states that Jeremy displays no signs of electrocution. He feels okay, even though there is a large hole burned into his sweater. The teacher concluded that Jeremy acts as an electrical conductor, which explains why his hair doesn't grow. Meanwhile, Powder managed to escape from the hospital without being noticed. Steele wandered down the street until Lindsay's dog, his classmate's pet, began barking at him. She is quite surprised that the boy has managed to recover so quickly. Lindsay noticed that Jeremy has a really nice eye color, but then he immediately took off his lens, which embarrassed her a little bit. Powder is being stared at by all the neighbors. He admits that he can listen to people from the inside, hearing all their thoughts and memories. However, Lindsay didn't really take his words seriously. Jeremy wandered back to his house on foot, but the sheriff blocked his path. The boy senses that the deputy is actually afraid of him. He mentions that he doesn't wish to return to boarding school, and the hospital is no longer somewhere Jeremy can remain. His most terrible memory is linked to this location, his entry into the world. A professor from the Ministry of Education has arrived at the boarding school. The reason is that Jeremy achieved a phenomenal score on the IQ test. It's fascinating that he acquired all his knowledge through books. Watching TV is forbidden for him, as all the equipment nearby malfunctions, and he himself becomes unwell. Tests reveal Jeremy has the highest development level ever, but he doesn't care. He just wants to return to the farm. He knows the professor thinks he's a fraud and came to prove it. Jeremy got mad and all the machinery shut down. The boarding school boys camped under the sheriff and deputy's supervision. Poudreau was reluctant to go. A thunderstorm was approaching, and he could sense it throughout his entire body. Lightning had taken his mother's life. He vividly recalled how it occurred. In the forest, all the lizards from nearby scurried towards Jeremy. He also sensed Mitch and John approaching from behind. John was holding a rifle, aiming it at Jeremy. But then, unexpectedly, a gunshot echoed. The deputy had fired at a deer, and he was quite pleased with himself. A true hunter doesn't hunt merely to kill. The animal is suffering terribly. Jeremy touched the deer and then grabbed the hunter's arm, making him feel the deer's pain. The man collapsed, screaming. Jeremy released him only when John almost fired at him. This agony was felt by Poudreau too. Jeremy explained to the sheriff and psychologist that he didn't attack the hunter, but helped him understand his actions. And he refuses to see anyone else. Even Jesse just acts like he's his friend. The boy has wrecked the office using his mind. All he desires is to return home. The doctor advises the sheriff to have his wife readmitted to the hospital. She's causing suffering to both herself and him. Yet as long as Emma was able to speak, she requested to remain at home. She's without hope, but Barnum can't bring himself to let her go. An exasperated Jeremy was sitting by himself in the dining room that evening when a physicist came up to him. Donald is absolutely infatuated with the unusual apprentice. It appears that he is almost entirely composed of energy. It seems like just a little more, and he simply won't need his physical body. His mind is at such a level of development that humans are still millennia away from reaching. It's almost as if he's a messenger sent from the future. Donald offered to be his friend and extended his hand to Jeremy. At that moment, he decided to show his teacher a trick and electrified him. His grandparents were always afraid to touch him. The deputy had undergone significant changes. He took all the guns out of the house and decided not to join in the shooting contest anymore. He even stopped bringing a gun with him to work. The man confesses that when Jeremy touched his hand, he experienced intense fear and pain. It felt like he was dying together with the deer. After that, he found himself unable to hunt anymore. It was as if he had absorbed the deer's soul and placed it in the Maya. That night, the sheriff visited Jeremy and requested him to come to his house. Barnum wanted to understand what his wife Emma was feeling and thinking. Jeremy conveys her thoughts. She can't pass away peacefully until she knows her husband and son have reconciled. Emma thinks Jeremy is an angel sent to take her away. She requested to have her old silver ring placed on her finger. Briefly, she even regained consciousness. Meanwhile, the worried nurse called the sheriff's son to come quickly. His father came out and hugged him tightly. Finally, Emma could go to heaven in peace. Jeremy went to the town fair. As usual, everyone stared at him. Poudre read the townspeople's minds. They thought he killed Emma. He told Lindsay that people think they live separately, but they're all part of this world. Everything's connected. Jeremy touched Lindsay, letting her feel his heartbeat, read his thoughts, and dive into his memories. Jeremy's father always believed he was unattractive and refused to acknowledge him as his own son. However, Lindsay thought he had the most beautiful face she had ever seen. She kissed Jeremy, but their moment was interrupted by her father, who angrily attacked the boy. Jesse managed to step in just in time before the situation escalated further. Powder felt once more like the loneliest person in the entire world. He decided he could no longer remain at the boarding school, so he packed up his belongings and prepared to head to the farm. but he decided to step into the gym and take another look at the most ordinary of guys. There, he caught a glimpse of Sky of Douchey, noticing his mane and hairy armpits. For this reason, John started mocking the young man and took his hat. Then Jeremy spoke the words that John had coaxed from his drunken stepfather. Throughout his childhood, the stepfather had beaten John, which is why he grew up so embittered. The big guy got angry and pinned the powder against the wall. Suddenly, there was a rumble of thunder. The villain noticed Jeremy's fear, and with his buddies, they dragged him outside. Mitch was the only one who tried to defend Powder. However, John wasn't going to be deterred. After they stripped the poor man of his clothes, John started mocking his extreme paleness. "He needs a coat of paint," John chuckled, then kicked Jeremy into a puddle of mud. Afterward, the two henchmen lifted him up and returned him to their leader. Just then, lightning flashed directly overhead. Powder started attracting all the metal items the bullies had on them. Suddenly, Jeremy's energy burst forth dramatically, scattering everyone nearby. The guys hurriedly scrambled to their feet, and John's heart suddenly stopped. Powder rushed over to him and began hitting him in the chest with electrical charges, trying to get his heart beating again. And remarkably, Jeremy succeeded in doing so. Mitch then promised that he would assist him in escaping from the boarding school. Jeremy cleverly hid in a car filled with haystacks and drove it all the way to the farm. At last, he made it home and went down into the basement. Shortly after, Jessie arrived and discovered the guy in an entirely empty room. Everything the young man once possessed had been taken away. She promises Jeremy that if he accompanies her, they will surely figure something out. Donald has offered to assist them. However, the conspirators didn't manage to escape in time. The police show up. Jessie pleads with the sheriff to simply look the other way and allow them to flee. Thunder rumbles once more. The sheriff pulls his partner aside and instructs him to quickly get out of here. For some reason, Jeremy chose not to get in the car with Jessie. He explained to the sheriff that his wife hadn't left. "She's everywhere," he said. Powder rushed into the field, arms wide open, and lightning directly struck him. Jeremy then ran and was filled with an intense energy until he vanished in a brilliant flash of light. The strong pulse moved through the crowd. Powder transformed into a part of everything, becoming pure energy that no longer required a human form.